It didn't bother the other two. Why did this James decide to kill me? She sniffled. But it won't be all right when I'm not with you. Her words were barely more than a breath. My arm flexed around her convulsively, while the hole in my stomach stretched wider. Because she was right. Everything would be wrong when she wasn't with me. I didn't quite know how I would function. I forced my face smooth and made my voice as light as I could. We'll be together again in a few days. As I said the words, I willed them to be true. They still felt like a lie. Alice saw so many different futures. Don't forget.
I got you. You're gonna be all right.
This was your idea. She sniffed. It was the best idea. Of course it was mine. I attempted to smile again, then gave up. Why did this happen? Why me? She whispered the questions flatly, as though they were rhetorical. I answered anyway, my voice sharp-edged. It's my fault. I was a fool to expose you like that. She stared up at me, surprised. That's not what I meant. What other reason could there be? Whose fault but my own? I was there, she continued. Big deal. It didn't bother the other two. Why did this James decide to kill me?
Oh, I missed the rest of 2 versus 8.
Again. There are people all over the place. Why me?
I thought it was still going on.
It was a fair question, an astute question, and there were more answers than one. She deserved a full explanation. I got a good look at his mind tonight. I'm not sure if there's anything I could have done to avoid this once he saw you. It is partially your fault. My voice twisted, and I hoped she could hear the black humor in it, the irony. If you didn't smell so appallingly luscious, he might not have bothered. But when I defended you, I remembered his incredulity, his indignation even, that I would stand in his way. The arrogance, the ire. Well, that made it a lot worse. He's not used to being thwarted, no matter how insignificant the object. He thinks of himself as a hunter and nothing else. His existence is consumed with tracking, and a challenge is all he asks of life. Suddenly, we've presented him with a beautiful challenge. A large clan of strong fighters, all bent on protecting the one vulnerable element. You wouldn't believe how euphoric he is now. It's his favorite game, and we've just made it his most exciting game ever. No matter how I analyzed it, there was no way around this. Once I'd taken her to the clearing, this was the only outcome. If I hadn't opposed him, perhaps it wouldn't have triggered his love of the game. But if I had stood by, I muttered, mostly to myself, he would have killed you right then. I thought, she whispered, I didn't smell the same to the others. She hesitated. As I do to you. You don't. What she was to me, simply physically, was something more intense than I'd ever seen in any other immortal's mind. But that doesn't mean that you aren't still a temptation to every one of them. If you had appealed to the tracker, or any of them, the same way you appealed to me, it would have meant a fight right there.
Electrolytes are salty.
Her body shuddered against mine. It would have been easier, though, I realize now, if it had come to a fight. I felt certain the frightened redhead would have run, and I doubted that Laurent would have stood with the tracker when it was an obviously losing prospect. Even if they'd all joined in, they could never have survived. Especially with Jasper launching a surprise attack from the midst of his smokescreen, while all eyes were riveted on Emmett. I'd seen enough of his memories to believe that Jasper could probably have handled all three, not that Emmett would have let him. And if we were a normal coven, though we could never be considered normal at our size, we probably would have attacked just for the insult. But we weren't normal. We were civilized. We tried to live to a higher standard, a gentler, more peaceable standard, because of our father. Because of Carlisle. Tonight, we had hesitated. We had chosen the more humane route, because that was our habit, our way of life. Long time no see,
how you been?
Did that make us weaker? I flinched at the thought. but then immediately decided that our choice was still the right one, even if it did make us weak. I could feel that. It resonated deeply in my mind, my being, or my soul, if such a thing existed. Whatever it was that drove this corporeal form. It didn't matter now. Alice might give us some power over the future, but the past was as lost for us as it was for anyone else. We had not attacked, and now we had the more complicated version still ahead. The coming fight could not be avoided. I don't think I have any choice but to kill him now, I murmured. Carlisle won't like it. But he would understand, I was sure. We'd given this tracker the option to walk away. He wasn't going to take us up on the offer. There was only kill or be killed. How can you kill a vampire? Bella's voice was a whisper. I could still hear the sound of suppressed tears in it. I should have anticipated the question. She stared up at me with a different kind of fear than before, almost as though she was concerned the task would fall to her. Of course, I could never be sure with Bella. I made no attempt to soften the realities. The only way to be sure is to tear him to shreds
I got the tape.
and then burn the pieces.
Fuck.
And the other two will fight with him.
I want that.
The woman will,
I want that,
if she could control her terror, that is. I'm not sure about Laurent. They don't
thanks
have
for the
a
lights,
very
Sapphire.
strong bond.
Appreciate
He's
you.
only with them for convenience. He was embarrassed by James in the meadow. Not to mention that James had made plans to kill Laurent. Perhaps I'd tip him off. That was sure to shift alliances. But James and the woman, they'll try to kill
That's
you,
not good.
she whispered, her voice distorted by pain. And then I understood. Of course she was panicking about the wrong thing as usual. Bella, don't you dare waste time worrying about me, I hissed. Your only concern is keeping yourself
Where'd she
safe
go?
and please, trying not to be
Yeah,
reckless.
I love this game. It is a little bit
She
spooky.
ignored that.
Occasional
still
jump
following?
scares.
Yes. He won't attack the house, though. Not tonight. Not while we were together. Was our splitting up exactly what the tracker wanted? But I remembered what Alice saw happening if we tried to guard Bella here. I had no love for Mike Newton, but neither he
Thanks for
nor
the likes,
anyone
everybody.
else in Forks was an acceptable sacrifice. I turned off onto the drive, dully noting that there was no sense of relief in reaching my home. There was no space out of harm's way while the tracker lived. Emmett was riled. I wished I could tell him the tracker's location to ease his agitation, but I couldn't risk being overheard. The tracker had guessed that we had extra abilities. It would only help him if we gave clues as to what they were. I noticed his thoughts drifting to the edges of my hearing just as Alice chimed in. He meets the female now, on the other side of the river. They split up again and watch. She takes the mountainside, he takes the trees. The extra distance didn't make me feel any better. Emmett's overzealous bodyguard mindset was operating at full steam by this point. As we rolled up to the house, he leaped from the truck bed and paced to the passenger side. He wrenched the door open and reached for Bella. Gently, I reminded him, almost silently. I know. I could have stopped him. This wasn't necessary.
So close.
But then, was any precaution too much at this point? If
Hey,
I'd
I'm
been
doing
more
this for likes.
cautious, we wouldn't be in this
Likes.
It did feel safer in a strange way to see Emmett, massive and indestructible, cradling Bella in his colossal arms. She was barely visible behind them.
Yes.
He ducked through the front door before a second had passed. Alice and I were at his sides instantly. The rest of my family was gathered in the living room, all on their feet, and in the middle of their circle, Laurent. His thoughts were frightened, apologetic. The fear was only heightened when Emmett set Bella carefully on her feet beside me and took a deliberate step forward. A bass growl building in his chest. Laurent took a quick half step back. Carlisle gave Emmett a warning look, and he settled back on his heels. Esme stood close to Carlisle's side, her eyes flashing from my face to Bella's and then back again. Rosalie was also staring at Bella, glaring at Bella. But I ignored her as best I could. I had more important things to deal with. I waited until Laurent's eyes flickered to me. He's tracking us, I told him, prompting the thoughts I wanted to hear. Of course she's tracking the human, and he'll find her. I was afraid of that, he said aloud. I need to get out of the way, his thoughts continued. James can't think I've chosen another side. The last thing I need is him looking for me afterward. Laurent suppressed a shudder. Perhaps I could tell him I'm just gathering info. His face, though, when he divided from us in the woods, that had to disappear while he's caught up in this hunt. My teeth were grinding again. Laurent eyed me nervously.
Nice.
He knew James well enough to understand the rupture he'd caused in the clearing. Though I felt no desire to do him favors, I knew he'd be grateful enough when James was dead. Come, my
Thanks
love,
for the likes,
I
everybody.
heard Alice whisper in
3,000,
Jasper's
damn.
ear.
I appreciate
I hadn't
you guys.
noticed him especially as we came in. He was still camouflaging himself. Jasper didn't question Alice now, even in his thoughts. The two of them darted up the stairs hand in hand. Laurent didn't bother to watch them leave. So effective was Jasper's effort. I saw that Alice would write down the necessary information
she's hurt
so
anybody
Laurent
yet.
could not overhear. It wouldn't take her long to pack what they would need. What will he do? Carlyle demanded
she
of Laurent,
quit.
though I could have answered as well. I'm sorry, Laurent said with every sign of sincerity. Sorry I ever met those demons. I should have known better than to play with fire. Damned boredom made me foolish. I was afraid, when your boy there defended him, that it would
she a
set him
bot?
off.
What's going on?
Of course it would. He ensured James would never quit till they were both dead. It's as if these strangers live in some other world, or think they do. The real world is about to intrude on that fantasy. Can you stop him? Carlyle pressed. Ha! Nothing stops James when he gets started. We'll stop
Oh,
him,
she's chasing me now.
growled. Laurent eyed Emmett almost hopefully. If only it were possible. It would certainly make my life easier. You can't bring him down, Laurent warned. He seemed sure he was doing us a great favor by giving us this information. I've never seen anything like him in my 300 years. He's absolutely lethal. That's why I joined his coven. A few scattered memories of his adventures with James and Victoria ran through his head, though Victoria was always a background figure on the fringes.
Taking a tape
James
with
had
me.
kept Laurent's life interesting, at least. But the sadism of these rampages had begun to bother Laurent in the last few years. By that point, there hadn't been a safe
Wonder if I
way to
get points for
disengage
escaping with a
himself.
tape.
He wished he could feel optimistic now, but he'd seen James triumph over impressive odds. His eyes turned to Bella, and all he saw was a human girl, one of billions, nothing to distinguish her from any of the others. He didn't think the words before he spoke them aloud. Are you sure it's worth it? The roar that ripped through my teeth was as loud as a detonation. Laurent immediately slid into a submissive posture,
Yeah, this
while Carlyle
definitely
held his
gets a
hand
little
up.
jump scary sometimes.
Control,
I
Edward.
don't know why she ignored
This is
me the
not
entire
our
match, and
enemy.
then right at the end she's like,
I
maybe I
worked
will
to
try and
calm
kill
my
you.
fury. Carlyle was right, though Laurent was certainly not our friend either. I'm afraid you're going to have to make a choice, Carlyle said. There aren't many choices left to me, Laurent thought. I can only make myself scarce and hope James doesn't think I'm worth the trouble. His mind ranged back over the slightly less fraught conversation they'd been having before our arrival, and fastened on one piece of information. I've clearly burned my bridges with this company, but perhaps I could surround myself with other friends. Talented friends. I'm intrigued by the life you have created here. He felt he was choosing his words very diplomatically, trying to make eye contact with each of us. My access to his inner monologue rather ruined the effect for me. But I won't get in the middle of this. I bear none of you any enmity. But I won't go up against James. I think I will head north, to that clan in Denali. He imagined 5 strangers like Carlyle, slow to attack, but with great numbers and talents among them. Perhaps that would give James pause. A feeling of gratitude had Laurent turning to warn Carlyle again. Don't underestimate James. He's got a brilliant mind and unparalleled senses. He's Every bit as comfortable in the human world as you seem to be. And he won't come at you head-on. A few of James's convoluted ploys ran through his memory. The tracker had patience and a sense of humor. A dark one. I'm sorry for what's been unleashed here, Laurent continued. Truly sorry. He inclined his head, submissive again, but his eyes darted to Bella and away, his thoughts mystified by the risk we were taking for her sake. They don't understand about James, he decided. They don't believe me. I wonder how many of them he'll leave alive. Laurent thought us weak. He saw our parent domesticity as a deficiency. I'd worried the same thing earlier, but not now. Weak was not the impression I planned to leave with James. But let Laurent believe James would win. He could hide in terror for the next century, and I would not mourn his discomfort. Go in peace, Carlyle said, both offer and command. Laurent's eyes swept through the room, appreciating the kind of life he'd left behind long ago. Though this was not a palace, and he'd lived in several, there was an atmosphere of permanence and sanctuary here that he'd not felt in centuries. He nodded once at Carlyle, and for a brief moment, I felt a strange kind of yearning from the dark-haired vampire toward my father. A sense of respect and a desire to belong. But he quashed the emotion before it could take root, and then he was racing out the door, with no intention of slowing until he was safely in the ocean, his scent untraceable. Esme dashed across the living room to start the steel shutters rolling down the huge windows that comprised the back wall of the house. How close? Carlyle asked me. Laurent was almost outside my range and not slowing. He had no desire to run into James on his way out. He'd hear nothing we said. I reached for James. Alice's vision had given me the direction. It was far enough that he too would not be able to hear our plans. About 3 miles out past the river, the tracker is circling around to meet up with the female. He would join her on higher ground, where he could watch in which direction we ran. What's the plan? Carlyle asked. Though I knew the tracker couldn't hear, and the shutters were still groaning, I kept my voice low. We'll lead him off, and then Jasper and Alice will run beside. I knew what he was asking. I looked straight into his eyes as I answered. As soon as Bella is clear, we hunt him. Though Carlyle knew this was coming, he still felt a flare of pain. I guess there's no other choice. Carlyle had been scrupulously protecting life for 3 centuries. He'd always been able to find common ground with other vampires. This would not be easy for him, but he was no stranger to difficulty. We needed to hurry, not to give the tracker any more time than necessary before we gave him a trail to chase. But there were practicalities we needed to address before we could run. I caught Rose's eye. Get her upstairs and trade clothes. Confusing the scent was the obvious first step. I'd take something of Bella's with me, too, and create a trail that would goad the tracker forward. Rosalie knew this, but her eyes flashed with disbelief. Don't you see what she's done to us? She's ruined everything, and you want me to protect her? She spit the rest of her answer aloud, resolved that Bella would hear it, too. Why should I? What is she to me, except a menace, a danger you've chosen to inflict on all of us? Bella jerked as if Rosalie had slapped her. Rose, Emmett murmured, putting one hand on her shoulder.
Oh no, they got her
She
again.
shook it off. Emmett's eyes cut to me, half expecting me to spring at her. But none of this mattered. Rose's spoiled temper tantrums had always been irritating, but this petty flare-up was ill-timed, and time was something I didn't have enough of. If she decided to cease being my sister tonight, that was her choice, and I accepted it. Esme, I knew what her response would be. Of course! Esme understood the time limits. She lifted Bella carefully into her arms, much as Emmett had, though the effect was very different, and flew up the stairs with her. What are we doing? I heard Bella ask from Esme's office. I left Esme to it and focused on my part. The tracker and his wild partner had moved outside my range. They couldn't hear us, but I was sure they could see us. They would see our vehicles leave,
She's gonna have to
and
attend.
they would follow. What do we need? Carlisle asked. The satellite phones, the larger sports bag. Are the tanks full? I'll do it. Emmett sprinted out the front door toward the garage. We always kept several gas drums ready for emergencies. The Jeep, the Mercedes, and her truck too, I whispered after him. Got it. We're splitting into 3? Carlisle was also wary of dividing our force. Alice sees it's the best way. He accepted that. He'll get hurt. He doesn't think. He just rushes in. This is all her fault. Rosalie was assailing me with a torrent of grievances. I found it easy to tune her out. Easy to pretend she wasn't even there. What's my part? Carlisle wanted to know. I hesitated. Alice saw you with Emmett and me, but we can't leave Esme alone to watch Charlie. Carlisle turned to Rosalie with a stern expression. Rosalie, will you do your part for our family? For Bella? She sneered the name. Yes, Carlisle responded. For our family, as I said. Rosalie glared at him resentfully, but I could hear her pondering the options. If she protracted this fit, turned her back on all of us, then Carlisle would certainly stay here with Esme rather than be on the front line, keeping Emmett from dangerous excesses. Rosalie saw only the danger to Emmett, but part of her was growing nervous about my visible detachment. She finally rolled her eyes. Of course I won't let Esme go alone. I actually care about this family. Thank you, Carlisle responded, with more warmth than I would have bothered with, and then dashed out of the room. Emmett was just coming through the front door with the large bag we kept some of our sports toys in slung over his shoulder.
How's it going?
The bag was big enough to fit a small
good day.
person. Bulky with equipment, it looked like there might already be someone inside it. Alice appeared at the top of the stairs, just in time to meet Bella and Esme as they emerged from Esme's office. Together, they lifted Bella by the elbows and rushed her down the stairs. Jasper followed. He was clearly on edge, tightly wound, his eyes roaming restlessly across the windows at the front of the house. I tried to use his savage appearance to calm myself. Jasper was more lethal than the thousands of vampires who tried to destroy him. Today, he'd exhibited new skills I'd never imagined, and I was sure he had other tricks up his sleeve. The tracker had no idea what he was up against.
No!
Bella
She
would be
found me
safe
just
with
in
Jasper
time for the
standing
Mori!
guard than anyone. And with Alice beside him, the tracker would have
Oh my god! I'm pretty good.
to believe that.
We got the car back today, so like
Carlisle was
I'm
already back
free
with
to
the
go
phones.
places again.
He gave Esme
After like a month.
and then brushed her cheek. She looked up at him with total
How about you?
confidence.
How was your day?
She was sure we were doing the right thing, and because of that, we would be successful. I wished I had her faith. She handed me a wad of fabric. Socks. Bella's scent
Thank
was
you for the
fresh
heart,
and
man.
strong. I shoved them in my pocket. Alice took the other phone from Carlisle. Esme
feel
and
that.
Rosalie will be taking your truck, Bella? Carlisle told her as if asking permission. It was so like him. Bella nodded. Alice, Jasper, take the Mercedes. You'll need the dark tint in the south. Jasper nodded. Alice already knew this. We're taking the Jeep. Alice, will they take the bait? Alice concentrated, her hands clenched into fists. It wasn't a simple process, looking for maneuvers that never actually came in contact with any of us. But she was tuning in to these new enemies. She'd get better with time. Hopefully we wouldn't need that. Hopefully we would end this tomorrow. I saw the tracker flying through the treetops, focused on the fleeing Jeep. The redhead keeping her distance, following the sound of Bella's truck as it chugged north a few minutes later. There were only the smallest of variations. By the time she relaxed her vigil, we were both positive. He'll track you. The woman will follow the truck. We should be able to leave after that. Carlisle nodded. Let's go. I thought I was ready. The passing seconds were already pounding in my head like drum beats, but I wasn't. Bella seemed so forlorn at Esme's side, her eyes bewildered, as if she couldn't process how everything had changed so quickly. Only an hour ago, we were perfectly happy. And now, she was hunted, left to vampires she barely knew for her protection. She never looked so vulnerable as she did standing there, alone in a room full of inhuman strangers. Could a dead heart break? I was at her side, my arms tight around her, pulling her off the ground. Her warmth in my arms was quicksand, and I wanted to drown in it, to never pull free. I kissed her just once, worried that the plans would all crumble into chaos if I couldn't make myself step away from her. Part of me didn't care if every human life in Forks and La Push and Seattle were sacrificed to keep her by my side. I had to be stronger than that. I would end this. I would make her safe again. It felt as though all the cells in my body were dying off one by one as I set her back on her feet. My fingers lingered against her face, and then stung as I forced them free. Stronger than this, I reminded myself. I had to shut down all this agony so I could do my job, destroy the danger. I turned away from her. I'd thought I'd known what burning felt like. Carlisle and Emmett fell into step beside me. I took the bag from Emmett. I knew what the tracker expected, that I would be too weak to let her out of my sight. I cradled the bag as though it contained something infinitely more precious than footballs and hockey sticks as I rushed down the front steps flanked by my brother and my father. Emmett climbed into the back seat of the Jeep, and I placed the bag upright beside me, then quickly slammed the door, trying to look stealthy about it. I was in the driver's seat in a flash, Carlisle already beside me, and then we were jolting up the drive at a pace that would have horrified Bella if she'd actually been there with us. I couldn't think like that. I had to trust Alice and Jasper and keep my head focused on my part.
2 health states in a
The
single
tracker was
trial.
still too far away for me to hear him, but I knew he was watching, following. I'd seen it in Alice's head. Turning north onto the freeway, I accelerated. The Jeep was a lot faster than the truck, but it wasn't fast enough to get any headway, even at the maximum speed I could chance without risking the engine. But I didn't want to outrun the tracker now. He would only see that I was pushing the Jeep hard, as though escape were truly the motive. I hoped he wouldn't realize I'd chosen the Jeep for just this purpose. He didn't know what else I had in my garage. For just a flicker, he was close enough to hear. Take a ferry? It's a long way around otherwise. I could cut through. Make the call, I said, barely moving my lips, though I knew he was too far behind us to see my face. Carlisle didn't bring the phone to his ear. He kept it by his thigh, out of sight, as he dialed one-handed. We all heard the quiet click as Esme picked up. She said nothing. Clear, Carlisle whispered. He disconnected. And I was disconnected too. I had no way to see what she was doing now. No chance to hear her voice. I shoved the despair away from me before I could start wallowing. I had a job to do. Chapter 24, Ambush. The tracker chose to run behind us, unwilling to guess at our route. Every now and then I would catch the edge of his thoughts, but never more than a few words or a view of the Jeep. He followed on higher ground, in the mountains, unconcerned when it took him miles from the road. He could still see us. I didn't want to think about where Bella was now, what she might be doing and saying. It would be too distracting, but there were a few things left undone. I whispered instructions to Carlisle, and he typed messages to Alice's phone. It probably wasn't necessary, but it made me feel better.
Certified backshot.
Bella needs
gang.
to eat at least
I
3
love your name,
times
dude.
every 24-hour period, and
Excellent.
hydration is important. She should have water on
Reminds me
hand,
of that
ideally
audio,
8 hours of
demonic
sleep.
backshots.
Carlisle, still keeping the phone low, texted as quickly as I could speak. And I hesitated. Tell Alice not to talk about our conversation before in the Jeep. If Bella has questions, deflect them. Tell her I'm very serious about this. Carlisle looked at me curiously, but typed my message. I imagined Alice on the other end rolling her eyes.
Whack.
She only texted back the letter Y in acknowledgement. I took that to mean that Bella was still awake, and Alice intended to keep my instructions to herself. She must see an unpleasant reckoning if she ignored me. Emmett was mostly thinking about what he would do when he had the tracker in his grasp. His imaginings were pleasant to watch. When we had to refuel, I used one of the large gas cans Emmett had loaded into the back seat. In my pocket, Bella's socks would leave the faintest trace of her scent in the air. I moved in a blurred rush, as if my only goal was to race away again, and I was pleased when the tracker came closer to watch. For a moment, he was no more than a mile away. I wanted to take advantage, to flip this flight into an ambush, but it was too soon. We were still too near the water. I didn't try to be evasive about our route, driving the straightest line the curving freeways allowed toward my destination. I hoped the tracker would interpret this the way I wanted him to, that I had a destination in mind, somewhere defensible, somewhere I felt safe. He knew little about us, but he knew this much. We had more physical assets available to us than the average nomad. Also, we were many. Perhaps he would imagine even more allies waiting in the forests to the north. And I had considered running toward Tanya's family. I was sure they would help. Kate, particularly, would be an excellent addition to our hunting team. But they were also too close to the water. The tracker might take one look at the 5 of them and break off for the ocean. All he'd need to do to disappear was submerge. It was impossible to track someone underwater. And he could come out anywhere. 5 miles down the beach or in Japan.
They must have
We'd never
installed
be
it
able
for
to
the
follow.
brand new part or something.
We'd have to regroup and start over. I was headed toward the national parks near Calgary, more than 600 miles from the nearest open water. Once we turned on the tracker, he would know that he'd been led astray, and Bella wasn't with us. He would run, and we would chase. I felt confident I could outrun him, but I needed a course with enough length. 600 miles gave me some padding. I wanted to finish this quickly. We drove through the night, only decreasing our speed occasionally when I heard a speed trap waiting ahead. I wondered what the tracker made of that. He'd already guessed I had extra abilities. This was surely giving away more than I wanted to, but the other option was too slow. Let him see this, my giving up information about my advantages, as another sign that we were intent on some specific destination. A safe house? That would make him curious. I wished I could hear the theories in his head, but he kept back just far enough for me to only see the sporadic glimpse. He must have formed a theory about my talents, and he probably wasn't far off. The tracker ran on, tireless, and from the little I could hear, enjoying himself immensely. His enjoyment irritated me, but it was a good thing. As long as he was content with what he was currently doing, it gave me time to get to my chosen arena for our ambush. As the time passed, though, I got nervous. The sun was closer to the western horizon than the eastern. We'd done nothing interesting but stop to refuel a few times, always leaving hints of Bella's scent. But would this long run bore him? Would he be willing to follow for potentially days and days through the northern territories and into the Arctic Circle if we kept going? Could he abandon his chase before he was absolutely sure Bella wasn't in the Jeep? Ask Alice if she sees the hunter quitting before we're set. Carlisle complied quickly. A few minutes later, the letter N. That settled my nerves. The sun moved slowly closer to the western mountains as we neared my target. I wanted to get him close enough for me to hear him. I needed to do something to interest him. We were on a small freeway that led to Calgary. We could have continued to Edmonton, waited for full dark, but I was getting more and more anxious. I wanted to stop running away and start hunting. I turned off onto a small side road that led into the southernmost end of Banff National Park. The road did curve around eventually back to Calgary, but it wasn't the fastest way to get anywhere. It represented a new behavior we hadn't exhibited up to this point. That would have to pique his interest. Carlisle and Emmett knew what the change meant. Both were suddenly tense. Emmett was more than just tense. He was thrilled, eager to get to the fight. This side road took us quickly away from the barren, early spring farmlands that lined the road to Calgary. We'd started climbing immediately, and now we were surrounded by trees again. It looked quite similar to home, but drier. I couldn't hear another mind anywhere nearby. The sun was on the other side of the mountain we were climbing. "Emmett," I breathed. "I'll buy you a new Jeep." He chuckled once. "No worries." We could pretend to stop for gas again. It was nearly time, but this change of pace would have the tracker on edge. We'd have to move fast. "On my word," I told them, waiting for the first touch of the tracker's mind. Emmett's hand was on the door handle. This road was much rougher than the last. I hit a rut that had the Jeep jolting out of our lane. As I worked to control the vehicle, suddenly the tracker's voice was there. "Must have a place close." "Go!" I snarled. We all three threw ourselves out of the speeding Jeep. I landed on the balls of my feet, and I was sprinting toward the sound of the tracker's thoughts before the others had got their balance. "Oh ho, a trap after all." The tracker did not sound either upset or frightened by the sudden reversal in roles. He was still having fun. I pushed myself, blurring through the trees we had just driven past. I could hear Carlisle and Emmett behind me, Emmett charging through the underbrush like a rhinoceros. His louder attack might cover some of the sounds of my own. Maybe the tracker would think I was farther back than I actually was. It was a great relief to run, to move under my own propulsion after the long drive stuck inside the Jeep. It was a relief not to have to rely on the road, but just to take the shortest route toward my target. The tracker was fast too. It didn't take long before I was glad I'd given myself 600 miles to catch him. He curved west toward the far distant Pacific as we climbed higher into the eastern edge of the Rockies. Carlisle and Emmett were falling farther behind. Was that the tracker's hope? Separate us and take us out one at a time? I was on my guard, waiting for another sudden turnabout. I welcomed the idea of his attack. Part of me was full of fury. Another part was just anxious to finish this. I couldn't hear his mind. He was slightly out of range, but I could follow his scent easily enough. His path turned northward. He ran and I ran. Minutes passed, then hours. We veered northeast. I wondered whether he had a plan or was just running aimlessly to throw me off. I could barely hear Emmett's charge through the forest. They had to be several miles back now, but I thought I could hear something ahead. The tracker moved quietly, but not silently. I was gaining on him. And then the noise of his progress was gone completely. Had he stopped? Was he waiting to attack? I ran faster, eager to spring his trap. And then I heard a faraway splash. At the same time, I crested a snow-dusted ridge that broke off in a steep cliff. Far below, a deep glacial lake, long and narrow, almost like a river. Water, of course. I wanted to dive after him, but I knew that would give him the advantage. There were miles of bank where he could emerge. I would have to be methodical, which would take time. He had no such impediments. The slow way was to run the perimeter of the lake, looking for traces of him. I'd have to be careful not to miss his exit. He wouldn't walk up onto the bank and start running again. He'd try to leap out, to put some distance between the water's edge and his scent. The slightly faster way was to split the distance with Emmett and Carlisle. We could cut the perimeter into thirds. But there was also the fastest way. Emmett and Carlisle were getting closer. I ran back to Carlisle, my hand stretched out in front of me. It only took him a second to understand what I wanted. He tossed me the phone. I turned again and ran with them, texting Alice. "Tell me which one of us finds the trail." We reached the overlook of the long lake. "Emmett," I breathed almost silently, "you decide to take the south bank from this point and then follow it around to the east. Carlisle, decide to run the north along this bank. I'll take the far side." I pictured it, committed to it, diving into the dark blue water, shooting across to the opposite shore, then running north to meet up with Carlisle at the far tip of the lake. The phone vibrated silently. "M," she texted, "Southern tip." I showed them her text, and then handed the phone back to Carlisle. He had a waterproof bag to protect it. I dove and heard Emmett push off behind me. I held myself straight as a knife, determined to cut into the water with as little sound as possible. The water was very clear and just a few degrees warmer than freezing. I swam several yards below the surface, invisible in the night. I could make out the sound of Emmett behind me, but he was nearly silent. I couldn't hear Carlisle at all. I slipped out of the lake at its southernmost point. The only sounds behind me were the drops of water falling off Emmett and hitting the stony bank. I took the right and Emmett the left. There was a ripple as Carlisle emerged. I glanced back. The phone was in his hand again, and he was motioning to Emmett. I'd chosen the right way. Sure enough, only a few yards farther, and I caught the hint of the tracker's scent. It was above us. He leaped into the branches of a tall lodgepole pine. I scaled the tree and found his trail leading off through the branches of the surrounding trees. And then I was on the chase again. I fumed as I flew through the branches. We'd lost enough time with the lake that he was many miles ahead now. He was doubling back the way we'd come. Would south be his choice? Back to Forks to find Bella's trail? It was a solid 7-hour trek, if run straight. Would he want to give me that long a chance to catch up to him? But as the endless night wore on, he changed direction a dozen times. He moved predominantly west, easing his way toward the Pacific, I imagined. And he kept finding ways to build his lead, to slow us. Once it was a wide cliff. We each decided the directions we would search at the base, but Alice just kept texting N. Her view of the tracker was so limited, she could only see how we reacted to his trail. It took too long for me to see the damage in the cliff face, where he'd broken his fall halfway down and then scaled sideways across the stone. Another time he found a river. Again, we exhaustively imagined the routes we'd go searching. He stayed in the water for a very long way. We lost nearly 15 minutes before Alice saw that Carlisle would find the tracker's trail 36 miles southwest. It was maddening. We ran and swam and swung through the forest as fast as we were able, but he just toyed with us, constantly building his lead. He was very practiced and, I was sure, quite confident in his success. The advantage was entirely his now. We'd keep lagging behind, and eventually, he'd be able to lose us completely. The thousands of miles between Bella and me kept me always anxious. This plan, leading him away, was turning out to be no more than a minor delay in his real search. But what else could we do? We had to keep chasing after him and hope we could somehow catch him out. This was supposed to be our big chance to stop him without endangering Bella. We were doing a pathetic job. He confused the trail again in another miles-long glacial lake. There were dozens just like this, all raking north to south through the Canadian valleys as if a giant hand had gouged its fingers down the center of the continent. The tracker took advantage of them often, and each time we had to imagine and decide, then wait for Alice's C or M or Ed, a Y or an N. We got faster at the mental part, but every pause put him farther ahead. The sun rose, but the clouds were thick today, and the tracker didn't slow. I wondered what he would have done if the sun was shining. We were on the west side of the mountains now, and running into human towns again. Probably he would have just quickly slaughtered any witnesses if he'd had to. I was certain he was heading for the ocean and a clean getaway. We were much closer to Vancouver now than to Calgary. He didn't seem interested in moving south, back to Forks. There was a slight northern trend. Honestly, he didn't need any more stratagems. He had enough of a lead to just race flat out to the coast with no chance of us catching up. But then the trail led into yet another lake. I was 90% sure that he was toying with us simply for his own entertainment. He could have escaped, but it was more fun to make us jump through his hoops. I could only hope that his arrogance would somehow backfire, that he'd make a bad choice that would put him within our reach, but I doubted it. He was too good at this game. And we kept following. Giving up didn't feel like a valid option. Mid-morning, Esme texted, "Can you talk? Is there any chance he'll hear me?" Carlisle wanted to know. If only, I sighed. Carlisle called Esme and they spoke while we ran. She had no real news. She was mostly worried about us. The redhead was still in the area, but she wouldn't come within 5 miles of Esme or Rosalie. Rosalie had done some scouting, and it appeared the redhead had gone to the high school in the night, and through most of the public buildings in town. She hadn't gone north toward our house again, and she'd only gone as far south as the municipal airstrip, but she seemed to be hiding herself to the east, maybe keeping close to Seattle for a bigger hunting ground. She tried Charlie's house one time, but not until he'd left for work. Esme had never been more than a few yards from Charlie throughout, which was impressive since he had no idea she was there. There was nothing more, no clues. She and Carlisle exchanged pained I love yous, and then we were back to the mind-numbing chase. The tracker was headed north again, enjoying himself too much to take the easy escape. It was mid-afternoon when we came to another lake, crescent-shaped and not as large as the others he'd used to slow us. Without having to discuss it, we each decided to follow our usual search routes. Quickly, Alice responded M, backtracking to the south then. Once we had his scent again, it led us through a small town tucked into a mountain pass. It was big enough for a light flow of traffic on the narrow streets. We had to slow down, and I hated that, even though I knew it didn't matter. We were too far behind for our speed to make any difference. But it soothed me to think that he'd probably had to move at human speed too. I wondered why he would bother. Maybe he was thirsty. I was sure he knew he had time to stop for a bite. We darted from building to building, trusting my senses to let us know if anyone was watching, running when we could. We were obviously not dressed warmly enough for the weather here, and if anyone looked closely, we were also soaking wet. And I tried to weave us around human vantage points to avoid catching any attention. We made it to the outskirts of town without discovering any fresh corpses, so he must not have been looking to quench his thirst. What was he seeking then? To the south now. We followed his trail to a large, rough shed in the middle of an open field, thick with thorny brambles that were still winter bare. The wide doors to the shed were propped open. The inside of the shed was mostly empty, just stacks of mechanical and automotive clutter lining the walls. The scent led into the shed, and was more set into the ground here, as if he'd lingered for a moment. I could only think of one reason, and I searched for the scent of blood. Nothing. All I could smell was exhaust, gasoline. I felt sick as I realized what I hadn't seen at first. With a low oath, I darted out of the shed and vaulted over the tall brambles. Emmett and Carlisle followed, back on high alert after the stupefying hours of failure. And there, on the other side, was a long line of flat dirt, rolled as smooth as possible, about 200 feet wide, stretching at least a mile to the west. It was a private airstrip. I cursed again. I'd been too focused on the water escape. There was an air escape, too. The plane would be tiny and slow, not much faster than a car. No more than 140 miles an hour, if it was in good condition. The slipshod little hangar made me think it probably wasn't. He'd have to stop for gas frequently if he intended to go far. But he could go in any direction at all, and we had no way to follow. I looked at Carlisle, and his eyes were just as disappointed and hopeless as mine. Will he go back to Forks to try to pick up her trail? I frowned. It would make sense, but it seems a little obvious. Not quite his style. Where else can we go? I sighed. Should I? I nodded. Make the call. He pressed the redial button. It only rang once. Alice. Carlisle, I heard her breathe. I leaned closer, anxious, though I could already hear. Are you totally secure? He asked. Yes. We lost him about 170 miles northeast of Vancouver. He took a small plane. We have no idea where he's headed. I just saw him, she said urgently, and also totally unsurprised by our failure. He's headed to a room somewhere. No clues to the location, but it was unusual. Mirrors covering the walls, A gold band around the middle of the room, like a chair rail. Mostly empty, but for one corner, with an old AV setup. There was another room too, a dark room, but all I could see was that he was watching VHS tapes. I have no idea what that means, but whatever made him get in that plane, it was leading him to those rooms. It wasn't enough information to help. The tracker could be planning to enjoy some downtime for all we knew. Maybe he wanted to make us wait, make us stew, ratchet up our anxiety. It seemed in line with his personality. I pictured him in an empty house somewhere random, watching old movies while we crawled out of our skins awaiting his return. This was exactly what we'd wanted to avoid. The good news was that Alice was seeing him independently of us now. I could only hope that with continued familiarity, she would get a better line on him. I wondered whether there was any significance to the room she described that would tie back to us. Maybe it meant that we would eventually hunt him down to one of those places. If Alice got a better view of the surroundings, it was a possibility. That was a comforting thought. I held my hand out for the phone, and Carlisle handed it over. "Can I speak to Bella, please?" "Yes." She turned her head away from the receiver. "Bella?" I could hear Bella's feet thudding as she ran awkwardly across the room. And if I hadn't been so demoralized, I would have smiled. "Hello?" she asked breathlessly. "Bella." Relief saturated my voice. The brief separation had already taken a toll. "Oh, Edward," she sighed. "I was so worried." "Of course. Bella, I told you not to worry about anything but yourself." "Where are you?" "We're outside of Vancouver." "Bella, I'm sorry. We lost him." I didn't want to tell her how he'd toyed with us. It would make her nervous that he'd gotten the upper hand so easily. It made me nervous. He seems suspicious of us. He's careful to stay just far enough away that I can't hear what he's thinking. But he's gone now. It looks like he got in a plane. We think he's heading back to Forks to start over. Well, we had no other theories anyway. "I know. Alice saw that he got away," she said with perfect composure. "You don't have to worry, though," I assured her, though she didn't sound worried. "You won't find anything to lead him to you. You just have to stay there and wait till we find him again."
Love.
"I'll be fine. Is Esme with Charlie?" "Yes. The female has been in town. She went to the house, but while Charlie was at work. She hasn't gone near him, so don't be afraid. He's safe with Esme and Rosalie watching." "What is she doing?" "Probably trying to pick up the trail. She's been all through the town during the night. Rosalie traced her through the airport, the airstrip to the south of town. Maybe we weren't wrong about his intentions after all." I continued before Bella could notice my distraction. "All the roads around town, the school. She's digging, Bella, but there's nothing to find." "Are you sure Charlie's safe?" she demanded. "Yes. Esme won't let him out of her sight, and we'll be there soon." We were definitely headed there now. If the tracker gets anywhere near Forks, we'll have him. I started to move, loping south. Carlisle and Emmett followed suit. "I miss you," she whispered. "I know, Bella. Believe me, I know." I couldn't believe how diminished I felt apart from her. "It's like you've taken half myself away with you." "Come and get it then," she suggested. "Soon. As soon as I possibly can. I will make you safe first," I vowed. "I love you," she breathed. "Could you believe that, despite everything I've put you through? I love you too." "Yes, I can, actually." It sounded like she was smiling as she spoke. "I'll come for you soon. I'll be waiting,"
I don't know about
she
that.
promised. It hurt to end the call, to disconnect from her again, but I was in a hurry now. I passed the phone back to Carlisle without looking,
What's up, cowboy?
and then pushed my lope into a sprint. Depending on how difficult it was for the tracker to locate fuel, we might actually be able to beat him back to Forks, if that was where he was going. Carlisle and Emmett worked to keep up. We were back in Forks in 3.5 hours, taking the fastest route straight through the Salish Sea. We went directly to Charlie's house, where Esme and Rosalie were on watch. Esme in the back of the house, and Rosalie in the tree in the front yard. Emmett went quickly to join her, while Carlisle and I went to Esme. Now that I was here to appreciate them, Rosalie was thinking bitter thoughts about how selfishly I was putting everyone's lives in danger. I paid no attention to her. Bella's house was ominously quiet, though there were several lights on downstairs. I realized what was missing: the sound of a game from the TV in the living room. I found Charlie's mind in its usual spot, sitting on the sofa, facing the dark TV. His thoughts were totally silent, as though he had gone numb. I winced, glad Bella didn't have to see this. It took only a few seconds of discussion, and then we scattered. Carlisle stayed with Esme, and I felt much better that he was there with her. Emmett and Rosalie did a sweep through the center of town and then searched the area around the airstrip, looking for an abandoned prop plane. I ran east, following the redhead's trail. I wouldn't mind cornering her, but her scent only led into the Puget Sound. She wasn't taking any chances. I swept the familiar Olympic Park on my way back to Charlie's, just to see if the redhead had gone anywhere interesting. But she seemed to have made a beeline for the Sound. She wasn't the type to risk a confrontation. Back at Bella's house, I took over watch while Esme and Carlisle scouted north to see if the redhead had emerged from the water near Port Angeles and was trying to come at Charlie from another angle. I doubted it, but we had nothing better to do. If the tracker wasn't coming back to Forks, which seemed evident at this point, and the redhead had gone to meet him, then we would have to regroup and come up with a new plan. I hoped someone else had an idea, because my head was a blank. It was nearly 2:30 in the morning when my phone buzzed quietly. I accepted the call without looking, expecting a report from Carlisle. Alice's voice erupted from the phone, trilling with speed. "He's coming here. He's coming to Phoenix, if he's not already here. I saw the second room again, and Bella recognized the sketch. It's her mother's house, Edward. He's coming after Renee. He can't know we're here, but I don't like Bella so close to him. He's too slippery, and I can't see him well enough. We've got to get her out of here, but somebody's got to find Renee. He's going to spread us too thin, Edward." I felt dizzy, dazed, though I knew it was an illusion. There was nothing wrong with my mind or my body, but the tracker had gone around me again, circling, always in my blind spot. Whether by design or by luck, he was about to be in the same place as Bella while I was 1,500 miles away from her. "How long till he's there?" I hissed. "Can you nail it down?" "Not perfectly, but I know it soon. No more than a few hours." Was he flying straight there? Had he been leading us farther away from her on purpose? "None of you have gone near Renee's house?" "No, we've not set foot anywhere outside this hotel. We're nowhere close to the house." It was too far to make running an efficient option. We'd have to fly, and a big plane was the fastest
Hey,
way.
what's up, Kings?
"The first flight to Phoenix
going?
leaves Seattle at 6:40, Alice told me, a step ahead. "You'll need to cover up. It's ludicrously sunny here." "We'll leave Esme and Rosalie here again. The redhead won't come near them. Get Bella ready. We'll keep the same groups. Emmett, Carlisle, and I will take her somewhere far away, somewhere random, till we can figure out the next step. You find her mother. We'll be there when you land." Alice hung up. I started running, dialing Carlisle as I sprinted for Seattle. They'd have to catch up to me. Chapter 25. Race. Even when the plane's wheels touched the tarmac, my impatience refused to ebb. I reminded myself that Bella was surely less than a mile distant now, and it wouldn't be many minutes more before I could see her face again. But that only made the urge stronger to rip the emergency door off its hinges and sprint to the building rather than wait through the interminable taxiing. Carlisle could feel my agitation and my absolute stillness, and he nudged my elbow lightly to remind me to move. Though our rose window shade was down, there was an excess of direct sunlight in the plane. My arms were folded so that my hands were hidden, and I'd let the hood of my airport shop hoodie fall forward to keep my face in shadow. We probably looked ridiculous to the other passengers, especially Emmett, bulging out of a sweatshirt that was several sizes too small, or as though we thought we were some kind of celebrities hiding behind our hoods and dark glasses. More probably northern bumpkins who had no frame of reference for spring temperatures in the Southwest. I caught one man thinking that we'd all remove the sweatshirts before we made it down the length of the jetway. The plane in the air had felt unbearably slow. This taxiing might kill me. Just a little more restraint, I promised myself. She'd be there at the end of this. I'd take her away from here, and we'd hide together while we figured this out. The thought soothed me a tiny amount. In reality, it took very little time for the plane to find its assigned gate, open and ready. There were a million possible delays that hadn't gotten in our way. I should have been grateful. We were even fortunate enough to end up at a gate on the north side of the airport, tucked into the late morning shadow of the larger terminal. That would make it easier for us to move fast. Carlisle's fingers rested lightly on my elbow while the crew took its time going through checks. Outside the plane, I could hear the mechanical jetway maneuvering into place and the knock against the hull when that was achieved. The crew ignored the sound, the two forward cabin stewards staring together at a passenger list. He nudged me again and pretended to breathe. Finally, the steward approached the door and worked to heave it out of the way. I desperately wanted to help him, but Carlisle's fingertips on my arm kept me focused. With a hiss, the door opened, and warm outside air mixed with the stale cabin air. Stupidly, I searched for some trace of Bella's scent, though I knew I was still too far. She'd be deep inside the air-conditioned terminal, past the security post, and her pathway there would follow a route from some distant parking garage. Patience. The seatbelt light turned off with a tinny ding. Then all three of us were moving. We eased around the humans and were at the door so quickly that the steward took a surprised step back. It moved him out of our way, and we took advantage of that. Carlisle tugged on the back of my sweatshirt, and I reluctantly let him pass me. It would only make a few seconds difference if he set the pace, and certainly he would be more circumspect than I. No matter what the tracker did, we had to adhere to the rules. I'd memorized the layout of this terminal in the onboard pamphlet, and we'd been loosed into the branch closest to the exit. More good luck. Of course, I couldn't hear Bella's mind, but I should be able to find Alice and Jasper. They'd be with the other families waiting to greet passengers just up ahead to the right. I'd started to edge ahead of Carlisle again, anxious to finally see Bella. Alice's and Jasper's minds would stand out from the humans like spotlights surrounded by campfires. I'd be able to hear them The chaos and agony of Alice's mind hit me then, like a sudden vortex erupting out of a calm sea, sucking me under. I staggered to a stop, paralyzed. I didn't hear what Carlisle said, barely felt his attempts to pull me forward. I was vaguely aware of his awareness of the human security officer eyeing us suspiciously. "No, I've got your phone right here," Emmett was saying too loudly, providing an excuse. He grabbed me under one elbow and started to move me forward. I scrambled to find my footing while he half-carried me, but I couldn't quite feel the floor under me. The bodies around me seemed translucent. All I could really see was Alice's memories. Bella, pale and withdrawn, twitching with nerves. Bella, desperate-eyed, walking away with Jasper. A memory of a vision. Jasper rushing back to Alice, agitated. She didn't wait for him to come to her. She followed his scent to where he waited outside a women's restroom, face clouded with concern. Alice following Bella's scent now, finding the second exit, darting at a speed that was a little too conspicuous. The hallways full of people, the crowded elevator, the sliding doors to the outside. A curb teeming with taxis and shuttles. The end of the trail. Bella had vanished. Emmett propelled me into the giant atrium-like space where Alice and Jasper waited tensely in the shadow of a massive pillar. The sun slanted down at us through a glass ceiling, and Emmett's hand on my neck forced me to bow my head to keep my face in shadow. Alice could see Bella a few seconds from now, in a taxi, speeding along a freeway through brilliant sunlight. Bella's eyes were closed. And in just a few minutes more, a mirrored room. Fluorescent tubes bright overhead, long pine boards across the floor. The tracker, waiting. Then blood. So much blood. "Why didn't you go after her?" I hissed. "The two of us weren't enough. She died." I had to force myself to keep moving through the pain that wanted to freeze me into place again. "What's happened, Alice?" I heard Carlisle ask. The five of us were already moving in an intimidating formation toward the garage where they'd parked. Thankfully, the glass ceiling had given way to a simpler architecture, and we were out of danger from the sun. We moved faster than any of the human groups, even the late ones running past us for their connections, but I chafed at the speed. We were too slow. Why pretend now? What did it matter? "Stay with us, Edward," Alice cautioned. "You're going to need us all." In her mind, blood. To answer Carlisle's question, she shoved a piece of paper into his hand. It was folded into thirds. Carlisle glanced at it and recoiled. I saw it all in his head. Bella's handwriting, an explanation, a hostage, an apology, a plea. He passed the note to me. I crumpled it in my hand, shoved it into my pocket. "Her mother?" I growled softly. "I haven't seen her. She won't be in the room. He may have already..." Alice didn't finish. She remembered Bella's mother's voice on the phone, the panic in it. Bella had gone to the other room to calm her mother, and then the vision had overtaken Alice. She hadn't put the timing together. She hadn't seen. Alice was spiraling in guilt. I hissed, low and hard. "There's not time for that, Alice." Carlisle was almost inaudibly muttering the pertinent information to Emmett, who had become impatient. I could hear his horror as he understood, his sense of failure. It was nothing compared to mine. I could not let myself feel this now. Alice saw the tightest of windows. It was maybe impossible. It was also absolutely impossible that we could catch up to Bella before her blood started flowing. Part of me knew what this meant, that there would be a gap of time between the trackers finding her and her death. A wide gap. I couldn't allow myself to understand. I had to be fast enough. "Do we know where we're going?" Alice showed me a map in her head. I felt her relief that she'd gotten the most vital information in time. After the first vision, but before the call from Bella's mother, Bella had given her the crossroads near the place the tracker had chosen to wait. It was just under 20 miles, with freeway almost all the way. It would only take minutes. Bella didn't have that long. We were through the baggage claim area and into the elevator bay. Several groups with carts loaded with suitcases were waiting for the next set of doors to open. We moved in synchronization to the stairwell. It was empty. We flew upward and were in the garage in less than a second. Jasper started for where they'd left the car, but Alice caught his arm. "Whatever car we take, the police are going to be searching for its owners." The brilliant freeway gleamed in her mind, blurring with speed. Blue and red lights spinning, a roadblock, some kind of accident. It wasn't totally clear yet. They all froze, not sure what this meant. There was no time. I moved too fast down the line of cars while the others recovered and followed at a more judicious pace. There weren't many people in the garage, none who could see me plainly. I heard Alice instructing Carlisle to retrieve his bag from the trunk of the Mercedes. Carlisle kept a medical kit in every car he drove in case of emergencies. I didn't let myself think about that. There wasn't time to find the perfect option. Most of the cars here were bulky SUVs or practical sedans, but there were a few options a little faster than the others. I was hesitating between a new Ford Mustang and a Nissan 350Z, hoping Alice would see which would serve better, when the hint of an unexpected scent caught my attention. As soon as I smelled the nitrous, Alice saw what I was looking for. I darted to the far end of the garage, right up to the edge of the intruding sunlight, where someone had parked their souped-up WRX STI, far away from the elevators in hopes that no one would park next to it and ding the paint. The paint job was hideous. Violently orange bubbles the size of my head, rising from what appeared to be deep purple lava. I'd never seen a car so conspicuous in 100 years. But it was obviously well maintained, somebody's baby. Nothing was stock. Everything designed for racing, from the splitter to the huge aftermarket spoiler. The windows were tinted so dark I doubted they were legal, even here in this land of sun. Alice's vision of the road ahead was much clearer now. She was already beside me, some other car's broken off antenna in hand. She flattened it between her fingers and shaped a small hook at the end. She popped the lock before Jasper, Emmett, and Carlisle, black leather satchel in hand, caught up to us. Ducking into the driver's seat, I wrenched off the casing on the steering column and twisted the ignition wires together. Next to the gear shift was a second stick, this one topped with 2 red buttons labeled Go-Go 1 and Go-Go 2. I appreciated the owner's commitment to upgrades, if not his sense of humor. I could only hope the nitrous canisters were full. The gas tank was at 3/4, plenty more than I needed. The others climbed into the car. Carlisle in the passenger seat and the rest in the back, and the engine was thrumming eagerly as we reversed into the aisle. No one blocked my way. We tore down the length of the enormous garage toward the exit. I clicked on the heating button on the dash. It would take a moment for the nitrous to heat from gas to liquid. Alice, give me 30 seconds ahead. Yes. The descent was a tight corkscrew that spiraled down 4 floors. Midway, I ran up against the back of an Escalade on its way out, as Alice had seen I would. The way was so narrow I had no option but to ride its tail and try to startle the other driver with one long honk. Alice saw that wouldn't work, but I couldn't resist. We spun out of the last curve into a wide, sunlit payment bay. 2 of the 6 lanes were empty, and the Escalade headed for the closest. I was already to the last kiosk. A thin red and white striped arm stretched across the lane. Before I could even really consider ramming through it, Alice was shouting at me in her head. "If the police start chasing us now, we don't make it." My hands clenched the neon orange steering wheel too hard. I forced my fingers to relax while I pulled up to the automated window. Carlisle grabbed the ticket, stuck behind the visor in an obvious way, and held it out to me. Alice snagged it. She could see I was as likely to put my fist through the card reader as I was to wait patiently for the machine to work. I drove another 2 feet forward so Jasper could roll down his window and pay with one of the no-name cards we used to stay anonymous. He'd pulled his dark sleeve to his fingertips. There was the barest glimmer as he reached out the window to shove the ticket into the slot. I concentrated on the striped arm. It was the checkered flag. As soon as it lifted, the race was on. The card reader made a whirring sound. Jasper punched a button. The arm popped up, and I hit the accelerator. I knew the road. Alice had seen the length of it and everything in our way. It was the middle of the day and the traffic wasn't terrible. I could see the holes in the pattern. It took me 12 seconds to shift through the gears until I was in 6th. I didn't plan to shift down again. The first section of the freeway was mostly empty, but a merge loomed ahead. Not enough time to make full use of a nitrous oxide canister. I veered to the far left to get around the influx. I could say this for Arizona. The sun might be ridiculous, but the freeways were exceptional. 6 wide, smooth lanes with shoulders ample enough on either side that it was as good as 8. I used the left shoulder now to streak by 2 pickups who thought they belonged in the fast lane. Everything was flat and sun-blasted around the highway, wide open with no place to hide from the light. The sky, an enormous pale blue dome that seemed almost white in the glaring heat. The whole valley was bared to the sun like food in a broiler. A few twig-like trees, scarcely clinging to life, were the only features breaking up the dull expanses of gravel. I couldn't see the beauty Bella saw here. I didn't have time to try. My speed was up to 120. I could probably get another 30 out of the STI, but I didn't want to push her too hard yet. There was no way to know if the engine had been tuned to stage 2 or 3. It would be touchy, unstable. I could only watch the oil pressure and temperature and listen carefully to how hard the engine was working. The huge arcing overpass that would carry us to the northbound freeway was approaching, and it was only 1 lane, with a very wide right shoulder. I skidded back across the 6 lanes to make the exit. A few cars swerved in surprise, but they were all a distance behind me by the time they reacted. Alice saw that the shoulder was not quite wide enough. Jazz, I'm gonna lose the side mirrors, I growled. Give me a view. They both twisted in their seats to stare at the road to the left, right, and behind. The view in their minds gave me a much better range than the mirrors anyway. I flew alongside the slower traffic, unable to keep my speed over 100. I gritted my teeth and held tight to the wheel as I scraped by the wide van that was riding the right lane line. With a screech of metal, my left mirror ripped off against the van's side, and my right mirror exploded against the concrete barrier. Bella was running across a white-hot sidewalk, stumbling. Or she would be soon. "Just the road, Alice," I spit through my teeth. "Sorry, I'm trying." Her panic bled through her thoughts. Bella was running into a parking lot, or would be soon. "Stop!" She closed her eyes and tried to see nothing but the pavement ahead. I knew these images had the power to render me useless. I forced them out of my mind. It wasn't as hard to do as I expected. Everything was the road. I could see it in 360 degrees and 30 seconds into the future. As I merged onto the northbound freeway, drifting across the lanes to the left shoulder again, up to 130 now, it felt like our minds were bound together into one perfectly focused organism, greater than the sum of its parts. I saw the patterns in the traffic ahead, shifting and congealing, and I could see the right way through every snarl. We flew through the shade of 2 separate overpasses so quickly that the flash of darkness felt like strobing. 1:45. 15 seconds ahead of me, the perfect bubble of space opened. I swerved into the center lane and flipped the clear safety cover off the bright red Go Go 1 button. The timing was perfect. The exact instant I was clear, I punched the button. The nitrous oxide spray hit, and the car shot forward as if fired from a cannon. 155. 170. Bella was opening a glass door into a dark, empty room, or would be soon. Alice refocused, also surprised at the ease of doing so. Her thoughts flickered to Jasper, and I understood. As a man of peace, Jasper struggled. But as a man of war, he was more than I'd ever imagined. We were all sharing his battle focus now, something he'd used to keep his newborns on track back in his war years. It worked perfectly in this vastly different situation, blending us into one hyper-functional machine. I embraced it, letting my mind spear point our charge. The hit of nitrous was already waning. 150. I searched for the next opportunity. "They're setting up the first roadblock," Alice noted. Neither of us was concerned. They were building it too close to intercept us. We'd be past it before they could pull it together. "And the second." She showed me the spot on the map in her head, far enough ahead that it would be a problem, even with another window opening in just 4 seconds. I considered my options while Alice showed me the consequences. The time was too short. We had no choice but to switch cars. Abstracted, I flipped up the safety and depressed Go Go 2. The STI kicked forward obediently. 170. 180. Alice showed me the specific vehicles available ahead, and I sifted through our choices. The Corvette would be cramped, and our combined weight would be more of a factor than it was with this streetcar. I mentally drew a line through a few other vehicles, and then Alice saw it. A glossy black BMW S1000RR. Top speed, 190. Edward, it's impossible. The image of myself astride the sleek black motorcycle was so appealing that for a second I ignored her. "Edward, you're going to need every one of us." Suddenly her thoughts were full of mayhem and blood. Human and inhuman screaming, the sound of shredding metal. Carlisle was at the center, his hands dyed glistening red. Jasper kept me from steering off the road. His grip on my emotions was so strong in that second that it felt like a fist clenched tight around my throat. Together we forced my mind back to the lanes in front of me. It was the shortest part of the journey we'd have left. The car didn't matter so much. Alice flipped through sedans, minivans, and SUVs. There it was. A brand new Porsche Cayenne Turbo. Too new for plates yet. Top speed, 186. already adorned with a stick figure family on the back window, 2 daughters and 3 dogs. A family would slow us. Alice used my decision to take this car and looked ahead into what that meant. Luckily, there was only the driver inside, a 30-something female with a dark brown ponytail. Alice couldn't see Bella on the sidewalk anymore. That part was past now, as was the parking lot. Bella was inside with the tracker. I let Jasper keep me focused. "We're changing cars under the next overpass," I warned them. Alice assigned our roles in a trilling voice, the words flowing faster than the speed of a hummingbird's wings. Carlisle dug through his bag. Emmett flexed unconsciously. I overtook the white SUV, hating the necessity of slowing down to pace it. Every second I lost, Bella would pay for in pain. Against all my instincts, I shifted down to 4th gear. The BMW motorcycle sped out of reach. I repressed a sigh. The overpass was half a mile ahead. The shadow that it threw was only 53 feet long. The sun was almost directly above us now. I started to crowd the Cayenne toward the left. She changed lanes. I followed quickly, then straddled the lane line so that I was halfway into hers. She started to slow, and so did I. Alice helped me time it. I pulled slightly ahead of the Cayenne and then steered left again, forcing my way into her lane while decelerating sharply. The driver slammed on the brakes. Just behind us, the Corvette I'd considered before swerved into another lane, laying on the horn as he passed. The whole traffic amoeba lurched to the right as one to avoid us. We came to a full stop in the last 10 feet of shade. All of us exited simultaneously. Curious faces flew by us at 70 miles per hour. The driver of the Cayenne was climbing out of her car too, her face in a scowl and her ponytail swinging with rage. Carlisle darted forward to meet her. She had 1 second to react to the fact that the most handsome man she'd ever seen was responsible for running her off the road. And then she was collapsing into him. She probably hadn't even had time to feel the prick of the needle.
From the shop.
Carlisle carefully laid her unconscious body on the raised concrete shelf beside the shoulder. I took the driver's seat. Jasper and Alice were already in the back. Alice had the door open for Emmett.
Oh no.
He was
All
crouched
3 of us are
beside the
going
STI,
down.
his eyes on Alice, waiting for her command. Alice watched the traffic racing towards us for the moment of least damage. "Now!" she cried. Emmett flipped the gaudy STI into the oncoming traffic. It rolled into the 2nd and 3rd lanes from the right. A prolonged series of crunches began as car after car slammed on the brakes and then slammed into the car in front of them anyway. Airbags popped loudly from the dashboards. Alice saw injuries, but no fatalities. The police, already racing after us, were only seconds away. The sounds faded. Carlisle and Emmett were in their seats and I was racing forward, desperate to make up for the seconds we'd lost here. The tracker leaned over Bella. His fingers stroked her cheek. It was only seconds away. 165. On the other side of the divided highway, 4 patrol cars screamed in the other direction, headed for our accident. They paid no attention to the soccer mom SUV speeding north. Only 2 more exits. 180. I couldn't feel any strain in the SUV, but I knew the danger now lay not in engine failure. It would take a lot to compromise this German-built
Chris,
tank,
thank you for the heart.
but in the integrity of the tires.
What's up, brother?
They weren't manufactured for this kind of speed. I couldn't risk blowing any of them, but it was physically painful to ease my foot back from the gas pedal.
Today?
160. Our exit was racing
for the
toward
like.
us. I whipped around a
Any
semi
marriage
and
proposals
swerved to
in
the right.
DMs?
Alice
by the
showed
way,
me the setup.
Amarita.
An intersection
Chris
spanned the
here
length
is
of the
looking
overpass.
for a
At the
husband
top of
and
this
or wife.
exit, a street light
And
was
you
just
should
turning
definitely
yellow.
get everybody you know
In 1
to
second,
message
the
him,
west side of the
DM him
intersection
personally.
would get a green arrow, and 2 lanes of vehicles would cross the middle of the road. Silently urging the tires to hold themselves together, I mashed down the accelerator. 170. We shot up the exit on the narrow left shoulder, passing within inches of the car's stop
I mean, like
for the light.
everyone you know.
I careened left under the now red light, the
He
back
needs-
of
he
the
needs
SUV
proposals
drifting
incoming
out to
from
the
all
right
directions.
as I narrowly made the turn, almost touching the concrete
Hey, Mira,
barrier
thanks
on
for
the
the like.
north side of the overpass. The cars headed to the on-ramp were already halfway across the intersection. There was nothing to do but hold my course steady. I bolted past the Lexus, leading the charge with not an inch to spare. Cactus Road wasn't as helpful as the freeway.
I can't complain.
Only 2 lanes with
heart,
dozens of
Chrissy.
residential roads and even some driveways
I was
opening
just telling
onto it.
Emerita I just
4
got the car
lights
out of the
between
shop.
us and the mirrored room.
So like
Alice saw
walks
we would
around
hit
the
2
lake
of
are
them on
an
red.
option again.
A speed
after,
limit
like, a
sign,
month and a
40
half, 2
miles an
months.
hour, flew by. 120. The road gave me one small advantage. A suicide lane, edged by bright yellow lines, ran right down the middle of almost its entire length. Bella was crawling across the pine floorboards. The
I'm on
tracker
day
raised
6
his
of my
foot.
fast,
Alice refocused, but
and
my
I'm drinking
mind
this like
veered.
electrolyte
For a
water.
10th of a second, I
and
was
it's
back
just
in my
salty
Volvo
as
in
shit,
Forks,
man.
thinking of ways to kill myself. Emmett would never, but maybe Jasper. He alone could feel what I felt.
Yeah, it's been 6
Maybe
days.
he would
Tomorrow,
want to end my
midnight
life
tonight, it's gonna
just
be
to
7.
escape that pain. But probably he would run away
But I'm doing
instead.
40 days total.
He wouldn't want to hurt Alice.
So it's a drop
So
in the
that
bucket.
left the
but
longer
my
trip to
previous
Italy.
record was 3. So
Jasper
I
reached
beat that by
forward
a
to
lot.
touch his fingertips to the back
Super
of my
proud of
neck.
myself.
It felt like Novocaine washing over my anguish. I tore down the center
on day
lane
5, I
uninterrupted
passed
for a
out,
mile,
but that's why I
veering
got the
back into the
electrolytes.
legal lanes to
I figured
fly
that's
under
what
the
was
first
missing.
green light. The next intersection rushed toward me. The suicide lane
Not
transitioned
really.
to a
Like,
left
I get
turn lane
grumbles every
with
once in a
3
while,
cars
but
already
it's not
lined
like,
up and waiting.
It's not a dramatic.
The right
like,
turn lane was
feeling.
mostly empty. I was able to avoid the motorcycle in it by
It was the
popping
first
up
3
onto the
days.
sidewalk
The
for a
first 3
second,
days were tough
fighting to
get
keep
through.
the SUV from
But
rolling.
after that, it kind of
I glanced at the
off.
speedometer. 80.
Once you're in ketosis,
Unacceptable.
your body doesn't have
I
the same
darted
kind of
through the
hunger
light,
response.
across traffic.
Thank you for the
Fortunately,
hand hearts.
a few drivers had seen me coming and lurched to a stop halfway into the intersection and reclaimed the suicide lane.
Well, yeah, if I can hit
100.
40 days,
The
like,
coming
that's the goal.
intersection was bigger than the last, wider and twice as congested. Alice, give me every
I've been sleeping a
possibility.
lot,
In her head, the
but
vehicles
aside
on
from
the
that,
road
it's
froze.
pretty normal.
She spun them counterclockwise and then back again. I saw them stretching first vertically and then horizontally. The pattern was tight, but there were tiny holes. I memorized them. 120. If we clipped another car at this speed, both cars would be destroyed. We'd have no choice but to race out into the blinding sunlight and bolt from Bella's location.
It's more like
People
to
would
prove
see
to myself that I
something.
can. It's an
None
act
of the others
discipline.
were as fast as I was. I didn't
For
know what
spirit,
the story
you know?
would be.
Thanks for the light.
Aliens or demons or
But
secret
I was
government
guided
weapons.
to
But I did know
take a fast,
there
like
would
a
be
really
a
long
story.
fast.
And then what? How would I save Bella when the immortal
And that's really
authorities
the only
came
reason to
asking
prove that I
questions?
can, to
I could not
prove
involve
my
the
commitment.
Volturi. Not unless I was too
to
late.
discipline.
But Bella was screaming. Jasper ramped up my Novocaine dosage. Numbness soaked through my skin and into my brain. I jammed my foot against the gas pedal
There's
and
also a lot of
swerved
health
into the
benefits,
oncoming
though.
lanes of traffic. There was just enough space to weave between the other cars. They were all moving so
Like,
slowly compared to me that it felt like
After 7, 8
dodging around
days,
standing
your body breaks
objects.
down all of the old
130.
Old white blood
I
cells,
snaked my
and all
way
of your
through the
old,
frozen
like, scar
intersection,
tissue,
crossing to the
and,
right side
they
of the
call them
road
zombie
as soon as it was
cells,
clear.
like basically dead
Nice.
cells that
Emmett
just
hissed.
are hanging out.
140.
And after
The
it finishes
final light
breaking all
would be
that
green,
down, it creates a
but
new
Alice
layer
had
of
different
everything.
ideas.
Your gut
Turn left here,
lining, your immune
she said,
system, your
showing me a
skin.
narrow residential
So,
road
like,
behind the commercial
benefits are
area
actually
where the
really
dance
good.
studio was located.
But in order to hit
The
that
street
level
was
of
lined
cell
with
reproduction,
towering
you have to go
eucalyptus
at least
trees,
10, 20 days.
quivering leaves more silver than green. The spotty shade was almost enough for us to move through undetected. No one was outside. It was too hot. Slow down now. There's not enough. If he hears us, she dies. Unwillingly, I moved my foot to the brake pedal and started slowing. The angle for the turn was sharp enough that I would have rolled the SUV
Hey,
if I had.
GMG, how you doing?
I took the turn
GMJ.
at only 60. Slower.
I feel like I
My
always say
jaw
your letters
locked in place
backwards.
as I brake down to 40. Jasper!
I'm pretty
Alice
good.
hissed at top speed, her words
Wagon.
nearly silent despite her
Try
fervor.
not to sleep.
You cut around the building and come through the front.
only 4
The
o'clock.
rest
I
of
need
us
to wait
go
till
through the
at
back.
least 7.
Carlisle, get ready. Blood all
It's a
over
good
the
day,
shattered
though.
mirrors,
How about you? How's your day?
pooling on the wooden floors. I pulled the Cayenne into the shade of one of the soaring trees and parked with only the slightest sound of tires against loose stones on the pavement. An 8-foot block wall demarcated the border between residential and commercial. The opposite side of the road was edged with close-packed, stuccoed houses, all with their shades down to keep the interiors cool. Moving in perfect synchronicity thanks to Jasper, we darted from the car, leaving every door slightly open so there would be no unnecessary noise. Traffic churned both north and west of the commercial building. Surely it would cover any sounds we might make. Maybe a quarter of a second had passed. We surged over the wall, leaping far enough to avoid the bed of gravel at its base and landing almost silently on pavement. There was a small alley behind the building, a dumpster, a stack of plastic crates, and the emergency exit. I didn't hesitate. I could already see what was behind that door, or what would be behind the door 1 second from now. I angled my body so there would be no mistakes, no tiny window the tracker could slip through, and then launched myself at the door. Chapter 26. Blood. Through the door. It shattered around me, flying off the wall in pieces. The roar that exploded from my core was entirely instinctual. The tracker's head jerked up, and then he dove for the crimson shape on the floor below him. I saw one pale hand stretched out in futile self-defense. The obstacle of the door had not slowed my momentum. I flew into the tracker mid-lunge, throwing him away from his target, smashing him into the floor with enough force to crater the wooden planks. I rolled, pulling him over me, and then kicked him to the center of the room, where Emmett was waiting. For the entire quarter of a second that I was grappling with the tracker, I was barely aware of him as a living creature. He was just an object in my way. I knew that at some point in the near future, I would be jealous of Emmett and Jasper. I would wish for the chance to claw and slash and sever. But that was all meaningless now. I spun. As I had known she would be, Bella was crumpled against the wall, framed by splintered mirrors. Everything was red. All the terror and pain I'd been subduing since I'd first heard Alice's dread in the airport crashed into me in an unstoppable tidal wave. Her eyes were closed. Her pale hand had fallen limp beside her. Her heartbeat was weak, faltering. I didn't decide to move. I was just there beside her, kneeling in her blood. Fire burned through my chest and my head, but I couldn't separate out the different kinds of pain. I was afraid to touch her. She was broken in so many places. I could make it worse. I heard my own voice, rambling the same words over and over again. Her name. No, please. Again and again like a record skipping. But I wasn't in control of the sound. I heard myself screaming Carlisle's name, but he was already there, kneeling in the blood on her other side. The words pouring from my mouth weren't words anymore, just mangled, heaving sounds, sobs. Carlisle's hands traced from her scalp to her ankle and then back again so quickly they blurred. He pressed both hands to her head, seeking ruptures. He pushed 2 fingers tight against a spot 3 inches behind her right ear. I couldn't see what he was doing. Her hair was saturated with crimson. A weak cry broke through her lips. Her face spasmed with pain. "Bella!" I begged. Carlisle's calm voice was the antithesis to my raw screaming. "She's lost some blood, but the head wound isn't deep. Watch out for her leg, it's broken." A howl of pure rage ripped through the room, and for a second I thought Emmett and Jasper were in trouble. I touched their minds. They were already gathering up the broken pieces, and realized that the sound had come from me. "Some ribs too, I think," Carlisle added, still preternaturally calm. His